Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Sabrina Paganoni. I'm here for our weekly HEALEY ALS platform trial webinar update. Waiting a few seconds for everyone to join. I'm here with our patient navigation team, Catherine Small and Alison Bullat, as well as Jessie, our administrative assistant. So thank you for organizing this webinar as always, Jessie. And I see that people are joining from the waiting room. So again, giving everyone a few seconds. And I think we can go to the next slide. So today I want to talk a little bit more about Regimen E and also the expanded access program that we are launching based on Regimen E specifically. So if we can go to the next slide. As discussed on previous webinars, the HEALEY ALS platform trial is now recruiting new participants for Regimen E. The enrollment for the other regimens has concluded. So we have spots now available for Regimen E, which is testing trialos. And if you would like any information about the science behind the drug, the mechanism of action, or practical information about what it means to be part of Regimen E testing trialos, we are sharing here the QR codes and website links to a couple of webinars that have been given in recent weeks, and they contain all information that may be may be important for everyone to know about this particular drug. Now we are making great progress on enrollment. So if you can go to the next slide, I'm happy to report that by enrolling at 57 sites now, we are really making great progress. So if you can go to the next slide, we have now randomized 124 individuals within Regimen E. Now, a few more individuals have signed informed consent. There are some, after somebody signs informed consent, there are some eligibility requirements that need to be met. And so some people that sign consent, unfortunately, are not eligible for the regimen. And so, and some are still in screening. So depending on their specific status, some of them may eventually be randomized within Regimen E, and others may not be eligible. So because the target sample size for each regimen is approximately 160 individuals, we are really close, but we still have, a little over 30 spots available. And so I would really like to thank you for all your dedication, for following us every week. I know we provide updates. Really, we cannot wait to provide the update that the regimen has been fully enrolled, because that starts the clock to getting the results. So if you have any friends or family members, or anyone who may be interested, again, that this is really important to try to conclude enrollment, because until we conclude enrollment, we cannot start essentially making any plans in terms of timelines, because the clock will start then once we have all 160 people included. And again, we have a little over 30 spots. And so hopefully we will be able to enroll very soon. Next slide. Now, as I said earlier, some people who may be interested in the regimen, unfortunately, may not be eligible due to medical reasons or other eligibility criteria. And so because of that, we heard from the community that there is an interest and really lots of people wanting to participate in research, even if perhaps due to their individual characteristics, they're unable to participate in the actual platform trial or any other randomized placebo-controlled trial. So for that reason, there is a mechanism that's FDA regulated called expanded access that's available for people with a serious illness. And that's a mechanism to get access to experimental treatments. Now, to clarify, we do not know if these experimental treatments are effective or not. By definition, they're still experimental. And so by definition, they're still being tested in trials. But again, while we're testing whether these drugs work in the clinical trial, for those people who do not qualify for the clinical trial, there is this option to get access to the drug, even if they're not eligible. Now, there's a few important notes about that, so we're trying to kind of focus on that over the next couple of minutes. One important point here is that obviously we don't want to, actually by regulations, we cannot interfere with the completion of clinical trials. So again, the population that's eligible for the trial is very different from the population that's eligible for the expanded access. Next slide. As many of you know, and actually thanks to many of you and their advocacy, a new law was signed almost a year ago, and that's called Act for ALS. That law specifies as one of the sections that there is funding for grants for research on investigational products via expanded access. Now, the key word here is that the law, again, says that there needs to be a grant mechanism for research on treatments via these mechanisms. So we have been fortunate to be awarded a grant. I believe it was the first grant that was funded for expanded access, funded by the NIH, thanks to Act for ALS funding, to do an expanded access program for trialose, which again is the drug that's been tested formally in regimen E in the platform trial. So while we're testing it formally in regimen E of the platform trial, we can also do research via expanded access on people that are not eligible for the trial. Again, different population, both projects, so the regimen E itself and the expanded access have research objectives. That's very important as per the law. Now, I do want to say that the only way to truly test if the drug is effective or not, so specifically in this case, if trialose is effective or not for the treatment of ALS, the only way to be able to tell is by completing enrollment and analyzing regimen E in the platform trial. Expanded access will not be able to determine if the drug is effective or not. However, it will provide important supportive research data that will complement or supplement the research data that we obtain in regimen E. I know that's a subtle distinction, but I think it's very important to understand. Next slide. And I had to say that, it's really wonderful to see that so many people are coming together to support the concept of expanded access. So while Act for ALS obviously provides great funding from the government, I do want to point out that it's incredibly important to continue to support local sites, whether it's our site or other sites, to be able to start their own expanded access program so that then they can join something like an Act for ALS funded program, because the Act for ALS provides funding for specific drug EAPs, but each center still needs to build their own infrastructure to be able to then be ready and available when a grant from Act for ALS comes in. So for that reason, we have been very fortunate to work with so many people in the community, and the names of the major donors are listed on the slide. And I do want to acknowledge a relatively new initiative, but one that's I think really important and very exciting, called Tech versus ALS. And thanks to their efforts, specifically, they've been able to provide seed funding to jumpstart an EAP site in Philadelphia at the Jefferson site. So the picture there is from the ribbon cutting ceremony. And so I think the next slide is a short video, and it's a video that was produced in collaboration with Tech versus ALS to explain what EAPs are and why advocacy and sort of jumpstarting sites to be able to build capacity to work on EAPs is so important. So maybe we'll play a short segment from that video.
EAP stands for Expanded Access Program, where a doctor could ask a company and the FDA for permission to give an experimental drug to someone outside of a clinical trial.
We also recognize that some people may not be eligible to participate for the formal trial. And so for those individuals, we have built an EAP companion to allow them to still have access to the drug, even if they're not eligible for the formal trial.
In terms of my experience as a EAP patient, my progression has been much, much slower than is typically expected.
The biggest challenges for running an expanded access program in a center are resources at the center. It costs about $10,000 a year to enroll one person in an expanded access program.
Only 2% of ALS patients today eligible for expanded access are getting it. So we desperately need funding in order to establish the infrastructure through which patients can access the medication.
We've partnered on this Tech for ALS to help grow expanded access programs at centers throughout the United States. And I'm happy to say that we've opened our first one in Philadelphia at Jefferson.
Our overarching goal is to make companion EAP sites available at all of the HEALEY platform sites.
But again, we need to have the infrastructure and the funding to be able to open the centers.
And if we're successful, all patients with ALS will have access to these advanced therapies.
Every day we're learning more about the biology and getting better targets, and that tells me that we're going to get better drugs. So I think in the next year or two, we're going to have more options for our patients of marketed drugs and still many more trials.
But one thing you learn very quickly is just to really focus on today, live for today, squeeze every ounce out of today. Don't grieve what you haven't lost yet, and fight like hell to keep it in the first place. So that's really my philosophy, and that's what we're working towards.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Sean, and Tech versus ALS. And again, we are working closely with Tech versus ALS, trying to really jumpstart other sites so that EAP options can be available at more sites. And that's basically complementary to what we're doing with the Act for ALS grant. And so if you go to the next slide, just to kind of summarize what we have done so far. So we have, over the last couple of years, or over 1 year, we have been building this EAP companion to the HEALEY ALS platform trial, again, with contributions from so many. And so far, we have had 3 study drugs prior to the Act for ALS. That was for regimens B, C, and D. That was done thanks to donations, drug donations from the companies, funding from IM ALS, and funding from other donors. And those programs allowed us to gather some safety clinical data and some limited biomarker data. Now, next slide. Now we are expanding again, thanks to the Act for ALS funding to another EAP companion to the platform trial, which is the one for trialos. This is expected to enroll the first participants in the first quarter of 2023. Up to 25 sites will participate for up to 70 participants. It's funded by the NIH. Really glad to work on this with my colleagues, Dr. Babu and Dr. Berry. And one important difference when you compare this particular EAP of trialos funded by Act for ALS and the NIH to other EAPs that we have provided or other companies have provided before, is that by law, this has to result in actual research data that can supplement drug development programs. So the infrastructure, the level of monitoring and the level of data collection and statistical analysis for this particular EAP is particularly stringent, again, because there are very specific research deliverables and objectives. And I said earlier, even the other EAPs do have some research objectives, biomarkers, etc. But by nature, by design, they're a little bit more limited in terms of the data collection processes and sort of, the research deliverables. This one that's instead is funded by the NIH is essentially like a full-blown clinical trial, but for people who are not eligible for clinical trials, again, in the context of expanding access to people who are not eligible for the trial itself. Next slide. As always, I'm so glad that Catherine and Alison are here. Please note that, not surprisingly, we'll be closed next week on Thursday for Thanksgiving. So happy Thanksgiving to everyone, but we will certainly come back the following week, and really excited to have Catherine, one of our coordinators, really a very senior, seasoned, experienced coordinator from UMass Worcester. She'll be here. She has been the coordinator for several ALS clinical trials, and she'll tell us more about opportunities at UMass in terms of enrollment and also in general how their clinic works. So thank you. We're really excited to have her there. I think we can stop sharing slides and we can start taking questions. So the first question is about enrollment in Regimen E. For those of you who followed us, we started this series of the weekly webinars a while ago. And enrollment rates were like unbelievable for A, B, C, and D. Despite the pandemic, every week we saw kind of an incredible increase in enrollment. And now instead, while we're making progress for regimen E, so the question is, why have we not completed enrollment yet? Why this seems to be a little bit slower than the other regimens? Well, I think that the main reason for this, quite frankly, is that this is an intravenous regimen. And so this requires weekly intravenous infusions that can be done at the site or at home. So I think that, perhaps, some people may have not been interested in participating because of that. I would like to say that, as shown in the other webinars that we previously produced, the home infusions have been going really well for the vast majority of people. I mean, the vast majority of people are really enjoying the fact that we can deploy research infusions in the home environment, which, by the way, is not something to be taken for granted. In fact, most trials don't do that. They require intravenous infusion. So we really put a lot of work and effort and funding into making this possible at home. And so if you know of anyone that is interested, please let them know that the infusions can be done at home, at most of the sites, and so we're having a good experience with that. So I think that it's really important to push enrollment, knowing that this can be done. But certainly, the fact that it's weekly infusions, I think, contributed to this. And I see a comment, actually, over the last few weeks, we have had great engagement from the audience with comments, trial participants giving us their comments. So thank you. Somebody wrote, the home infusions are working well for me in regimen E. So thank you for that. So there's a very good question about what happens if somebody goes in, signs in for consent and is screened for regimen E, but then because of a medical condition, diabetes being one of them, cannot enroll in regimen E. Can they go into the expanded access? Well, I would say that we need to look exactly at the situation and what the exact medical condition is. We do have a medical monitor for the expanded access, so we can certainly review the specific situation in detail. That would depend again on the specific situation. Good question about participation in clinical trials. Why do we think that only about 10% of people with ALS participate in clinical trials? Well, I think that there's many reasons for this. Number one, as you know, we really need to do a better job at diagnosing ALS earlier. That's one reason, so that we can expand the pool, and certainly many of us are working on that. The second reason is that, unfortunately, due to sometimes geography or travel requirements or logistical reasons, people have difficulties accessing a trial. And in fact, one of the reasons that we really put a lot of work into having so many sites part of the platform trial is because we wanted to bring the trial as close as possible to where people live. Now, I understand that we don't have a site in every single city, but we are really continuing to look. In fact, we are onboarding new sites as we speak, with the idea of continuing to expand to the extent possible. And then obviously there's the eligibility criteria problem. So again, there's a number of reasons that cause this. I don't know, Catherine or Alison, if you want to say anything about what you are doing to try to change the situation. You and your partners and colleagues. I know there's a group of people who are working on this.
Yeah, Sabrina, I think you made a lot of really good points where it's a combination of factors. And when you comb through literature and look through surveys of, why people aren't participating, part of it is just geographic accessibility, where, some people live 50 or 100 miles from a multidisciplinary clinic. And so trying to open research centers in locations that are closer to those people, or more widely accessible is part of it. I think part of it too is just, the education of some people. If their clinic isn't involved in research, they might not know that it's even an option to tack on to their clinical care. So I think part of what Alison and I try to do as patient navigators is making sure that everyone has equitable information about the opportunities that are available, in addition to trying to disperse platform trial centers to broader locations throughout the US.
Great. And Alison, do you want to share anything about what the research ambassadors or other groups you work with are doing?
Just to say that there's such an effort being put on education and access and inclusivity into clinical research that I think that 10% number is changing and is going to change. There are a lot more clinical trials going on. There are observational studies. There are a lot more opportunities and choices for potential participants to participate. So I think we'll see that number moving next time we take a snapshot of it.
Excellent. There's a few very good technical questions about home infusion, so I'll take them sort of rapid fire. Do you partner with home infusion companies? Absolutely. We do have an infusion company that's available nationally called PCM. And so they go to patients' homes nationally. They're, very experienced, very established home infusion company that again partners with local, sort of nurses so that, this is available everywhere, essentially in the US. There's a question about, do these companies take precautions in terms of COVID? So I had to say that I don't remember all the specific precautions that they take, and they may differ from state to state. They certainly comply with local and state regulations when they go to patients' homes. Obviously, these are fully licensed nurses, and again, they comply with all applicable local laws for home visits. Can somebody take a vacation if you're getting weekly infusions in regimen E? Absolutely. People can actually take vacations while they are on regimen E, and a couple of things about that. If people go on vacation, obviously there are short windows around visits. So depending on how long of a vacation we're talking about, the visits in the original town can be adjusted to remain within windows. Then if we're talking of a longer vacation, if you are within the country, because this home infusion company provider is available everywhere, if with some notice, they can arrange for infusion nurses wherever you're going. So let's say if you're going to Florida, for example, they can find somebody there, etc. If you go overseas, I don't think that we can do that, and that's due to regulations. Actually, not there's a specific question about going overseas. We cannot provide experimental drugs outside of the US at this point, based on the setup right now. But obviously, in the future that could be different. But right now it's not possible. A few questions about other regimens here. So I'm gonna take them sort of, as they come in. First of all, regimen D, we are not enrolling for regimen D as in David. We are now working on sort of closing these out in terms of results. And so I don't have an exact timeline for when we're gonna have the results, but I can tell you that the work is starting to begin to prepare for that. So as soon as we'll have available news, we'll let you know. As you've seen for the previous regimens, as soon as we got the results and we're able to share, there's a number of regulations about that and sort of the stepwise approach in terms of releasing top-line results, etc. And again, as soon as we were able to share them, we did right away. And we had a number of webinars, both for the people who actually participated in the regimen and this webinar on Thursday. So please keep following us, and we'll be sure to share updates as they become available. And then other questions, the new regimen. So we have the Calico regimen. That's going to be the next regimen that's going to start up in early 2023. So I'll give you updates again every week, because this is a little bit of a moving target in terms of, which actual week will you have the first participant. But I can tell you that we are working very hard on that. And we are also working with other companies to add more regimens to the trial. And there's a question about why didn't you add many more regimens to the trial already? Well, actually, there is the platform, the way it's funded and structured right now, it is optimal for having, a few drugs at any given time. So I think now we have, also for the sites to be able to, every site participates in every regimen. And so in order to be able to kind of physically or operationally manage that, we sort of need to close out the first few and add the other ones. Our intention is to always have spots available for patients. And in fact, so far, that has basically happened. And so we may be the exception of just a few weeks when we had closed enrollments in between regimens. And I think the same will be true here. Hopefully, we're going to finish enrolling in regimen E this year. And then again, maybe there's going to be a few weeks of gap, but then right away, we're going to start enrolling for Calico. Good question about infusions again for regimen E. Is it possible to do infusions with a port? Yes, it's possible to do infusion with a port. We still have the home infusion company help because this is a sort of an experimental treatment. So it's a little bit different from, let's say, regular Radicava or IV Radicava for those of you who had it before, because that was more a prescription drug. Here, it's still an investigational product. And so we do have a protocol to give it. That doesn't mean that it's more complicated or dangerous. That doesn't mean that. It's just that it's because it's investigational, we have to collect the data. So we need to get vitals from a nurse. We need to do things for safety. Again, so far, absolutely things have been going very well, but we still have to do it because it's a trial. And so we still have to get vitals, have a nurse available. So the question, I think that the question is, how can you infuse, which different methods can you use to infuse regimen E? So if people have a port, they can use a port. And if people don't have a port, they can either have it placed or use regular IVs. So that means that every week the nurse will insert a small catheter and then remove it, so that you don't have it for the entire week. You just have it for the infusion, and then do it again the following week. So I think those were all the questions. And if you have other, questions, obviously email them to us. And also don't forget the recordings of the previous webinars have a lot of these sort of technical questions for those of you who may be considering participation in regimen E. We tried again to provide detailed information, and the webinar recordings are available for that. Great. I think we took all the questions for tonight. So thank you so much. Again, I'm sorry we're not going to see you next week for Thanksgiving, but I hope everyone has a good week next week, and then we'll see you December 1st. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.